Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Dave Lucas, and you're watching a very special All Points. H.D. Graham and his books. He's written 7 of them, and he is a Master Sergeant for the Air Force. Almost called you Army. That got me beat up. And he has done a great job in Special Ops, and so we're very glad to be here. Now, we did an introduction video, and then we did a video over his first book. In this video, we're going to go over some things that he didn't get to cover in that first book, and we'll introduce his second book, and we'll just keep going till we get all these in. As you can see behind me, he has written several books, 7 in all. And we maybe have a special announcement at the end of this. He'll write another one. We have no idea. But HD, it's so good to have you on the program. Thank you so very much for taking the time. We're in your home so that the folks know where we are as we do these. And these are your books, a bountiful number of books that you have written, 7 in all. And we talked a lot about your first book, and we want to pick that up.
Yeah, I want to get back to my first combat experience, and this took place on 21 March 1963, and that was on my second temporary duty to Vietnam, not the first duty. But anyway, we means CH-21 crew and myself, we were taking 10 Montagnard trainees back to the Central Highlands after they had been trained, and we were going to pick up 10 new recruits and bring them to Quin Yon for me to train them. And Paul Beck was the crew chief on the Army CH-21 helicopter, and somehow when we got to Ple Du Lim, or right before we got there, there was a malfunction in the chopper and it broke down, and he wasn't able to finish the mission and bring the recruits and myself back to Quin Yon. So they called their sister unit at Pleiku, and the mission was given to Warrant Officer Joyce and his crew in another CH-21, and they arrived in the early afternoon. I had my recruits all ready to board and go, and they were on the ground only about 5 minutes when we took off. And we were about halfway to Quin Yon over the jungles when we developed a serious fuel leak. So Warrant Officer Joyce had to set his chopper down in a small clearing in the jungle, and I got the troops off board, and they were about scared to death because they thought we were crashing. It's the first time they'd ever been on a chopper. You know, Montagnard recruits, they know crossbows and roaming the mountains and hills on foot and so forth, but they'd never been any type of flying machine. So they were about scared to death when we started going down. And anyway, I got them off the chopper, settled them a safe distance away from the chopper, so if anything happened during the repair, that they would be safe. And the crew chief yelled to us to get back on board because they were ready to roll. So I got the recruits up, started to the chopper, and 2 Viet Cong raised up right in front of the windshield of the helicopter and brought their AK-47s up to fire at the pilot and co-pilot. Well, I thought to myself, they are not going to get me stuck out here in the jungle with 10 raw recruits. So I opened up with my N2, or my, yes, it was an M2, it wasn't AR then, and the Viet Cong on the left, he was knocked back into the jungle, and the one on the right, he flinched as if he had been hit in the arm or shoulder, and he disappeared in the jungle as well. And it took me only a few seconds to get the recruits on board, and we were out of there.
Oh my gosh. And so they had snuck in, but after the time you guys had sat down, snuck in the grass, and
we were there probably less than 15 minutes.
And so they were right on the job there. And you, just a split-second decision, decided to engage.
Well, I had to or lose the crew that I was expecting to get a ride with.
Yeah, and then stuck out there maybe a worse situation.
Well, when we got to Quin Yon and unloaded or offloaded, the entire crew, all the crew members came up to me and was shaking my hand and everything, and they were very happy. They said I had prevented their deaths. And I said, well, I was only protecting my ride home. And I took my troops to the training area, and then they talked with the commander before they left. And Major Joyce and his crew found out that I was an Air Force trooper, not actually a Special Forces trooper. And I don't know where they were upset about that, but they said, well, we can tell you one thing, the man handled the job.
He can handle the job. We're talking with H.D. Graham, and we're here on his, it's the Rocking G Ranch, right? And it's a big farm, and we're in his study. And these are all his books in back of us. And H.D. spent an illustrious time as Special Forces in the Air Force, which surprised a lot of us. And so those of you in the Air Force are very, very proud, and the rest of you are a little bit surprised, like me, because I had never heard of that before. And so H.D.'s catching us up on some stories that we were not able to get in his book called Mother, Please Let Me Go, about his initial foray in the services. And he's got 6 other books besides that one. What else in this book?
Well, then on the 22nd of March would have been the next day, Mr. Joyce, Warrant Officer Joyce, sent me a letter of appreciation, and he closed out the letter at the end by saying that he would be happy to have me on future missions.
Well, good. Good.
Now, the next thing I want to talk about is on page 108 in the book, and I was on a 5-man reconnaissance team, and we were some miles from Quinyon at the time, and we got in a running battle with the Viet Cong, and Mike, one of the American recon troopers with us, he got his boot heel shot off, and the Viet Cong were chasing us and, of course, firing at him, and we were trying to fire at him over our shoulders and so forth to discourage him a little bit. And so Mike got his boot heel shot off, and I got the seam on the left side of my shirt cut by a bullet. And I didn't know anything about it until we got into camp. And everybody took a look at each other because we had run through the wait a minute bushes, which is sticky, thorny bushes that have straight thorns about 2 or 3 inches long and also curved thorns. And the reason we call them wait a minute bushes is because if you get hooked up on one of those curved thorns, it takes a minute or 2 to get loose. So that's why they're called wait a minute bushes.
That makes you wait a minute, at least.
Yes. Anyway, in 2017, I was having a lot of problems with my left side, and it was infected a lot, and had a big place on it. And so the VA hospital decided they're going to have to lance this place. And when they lanced it, a piece of shrapnel came out.
So you had a piece in there.
And I had apparently had that piece of shrapnel in there from May 1963, and this was 2017, so it was in there 57 years.
Wow.
And I did not get a Purple Heart for that wound because I didn't know I'd been wounded.
You didn't know you'd even been wounded.
And by that time, I had retired from the Air Force, and the Air Force does not give Purple Hearts after the member retires.
So there's no paybacks.
No, except just a scar to show.
Just a scar to show and a great story to tell on video.
Okay, the next incident was when I was wounded on 17 October 1963, dropping leaflets from an OH-13 Army helicopter. And I had no intentions of being on an OH-13 that day, but the helicopter pilot had sat down near our Air Force base operations at Quinyon, and he went into base operations. He wanted someone to go with him, throw out leaflets. Of course, he didn't get any volunteers from those officers. So he came over to our headquarters building, and he wanted to volunteer to go with him, throw out leaflets. And he didn't say why he needed to throw out leaflets. And Colonel Dick says, well, I don't have anyone available. And the young warrant officer pointed to me and said, well, what about him? And Colonel Dick said, H.D., you want to take a ride on a chopper? And I saw the baby chopper come in. I'd never been on one like that small, and I thought it would be a lot of fun. And I said, sure, I'll volunteer. I'd just love to take a ride on that chopper. Well, so we headed for the chopper, and I asked Warrant Officer Roberts, who was the pilot, I said, where are we going? He said, well, we're going about maybe 30, 40 miles southwest of Quinyon to drop some leaflets. I thought, well, that sounds all right to me. So we got in the chopper and took out. We went over the north part of the field to Highway 1 that runs between Quinyon and Pleiku. Then we flew west probably 6-7 minutes. And those were slow choppers, so it couldn't have been a lot of miles. But anyway, then we headed directly south, and we flew over a mountain range. And on the south side of the mountain range was the most beautiful waterfalls I'd ever seen. And it cascaded down the mountains clear to the river in probably 6 or 7 different waterfalls, a lot of white water and everything. It was beautiful. And I saw this village ahead of us, and I thought probably that was our destination, although the warrant officer had never said. I figured that was probably our destination because that's the only hamlet that seemed to be in the area. Well, anyway, we started circling, and he said, now get the leaflets out as soon as possible, drop them with both hands, because the hamlet is under attack and on the verge of being overrun, and we have 2 Special Forces medics trapped down there, and we're trying to tell them and the South Vietnamese troops where the pickup point will be so we can lift them out of the area in the combat zone. So I started dropping leaflets as he flew around and around in a circle, and we started getting ground fire from small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs. And eventually one of the rocket-propelled grenades exploded on the right side of the chopper where I was sitting, and I was wounded in the right hand, the right wrist, the upper right arm, and the lower right part of my stomach. But I continued to drop leaflets until I had practically all of them out of the chopper. And I told the warrant officer I had been hit, and he looked over at me, and he jerked the chopper around and it went almost on its right side, and I thought for sure we were going to crash. But he was able to regain control, and we flew back to Quin Yen, was met by an Air Force or an Army ambulance. It was a Jeep ambulance, and they took me to the field hospital, and I was given 2 units of blood right away, and I was in the hospital for 3 days and 2 nights before I was released. And Dr. Martin, he told me right before I was released, he said, man, you were very close to cashing in. And I said, well, how close would you estimate, Doc? A day, a week, or something? He said, how about 12 to 14 minutes?
Oh, my.
I had lost so much blood.
Lost a lot of blood.
But I recovered from it, and I continued working with the Special Forces.
That's incredible. And did you regret going, or was just all part of the job? And
No, I didn't regret going, but when I was briefed by the general and the colonel at Saigon, they told me that the Special Forces could not run me off, but that they would make it so rough and so difficult that I would probably want to just give up and quit. But the general cautioned me, yes, I had the right to give up and quit, but I would never be able to face any of my family members or any Air Force officer or enlisted person after that. So I made up my mind I wasn't going to quit under any circumstances, and that the only way they could get rid of me was shoot me or kill me or something.
wow. Wow.
And I fully believed I would never survive.
You didn't think you were going to survive?
No, so it didn't make any difference what I did because I didn't believe I would survive anyway.
So that's why you decided to just keep doing these missions, was because you thought, well, I'm not probably going to make it out of here anyway.
And perhaps I could save the lives of some of the troopers or something in the process.
That's incredible.
Well, I was wounded again on 7 November 1963. And this time I went with Sergeant Rod Gillum, an Army Sergeant First Class, and he was going to the new Popular Forces Civil Guard training camp about 30 miles northwest of Quin Yen. And the Popular Forces and Civil Guards, they were equivalent to our reserves and National Guard troops here in the States. Matter of fact, they were set up by our Special Forces throughout the country for that purpose, to be reserves for the Army, and the Civil Guards were going to be the National Guard to pull in the local areas to fight the Viet Cong. Well, when we got to the training camp, now, the odd thing was Sergeant Gillum was going to the training camp to train their cooks to operate their new stainless steel cooking equipment. And I thought that was odd that they would have equipment like that out in the jungle. But it all ran on propane or bottled gas. Of course, it didn't have any electric or natural gas or anything like that. So, but anyway, he was going to train them how to run their new kitchen equipment. And just as we got to the camp and started to get out, the camp was attacked by a large force of Viet Cong, and they opened fire on us and also on the camp. And they were not only using small arms fire, they were also using crossbows, the Viet Cong were. And I was hit across the shin of my right leg with a crossbow arrow, and I can tell you that wound really, really hurt, hitting the shin bone. And I was also hit by a bullet that apparently had ricocheted off the Jeep. And after the firing stopped and Sergeant Gillum checked out the camp, the casualties and so forth, he came back and he got me in a Jeep, and we got back to Quin Yen, and I went to the field hospital again, and the same medic that had taken care of me the first time, Sergeant Burton, he also cleaned the wound, had Dr. Martin to take a look at it. And at the time, we did not have nurses at Queen Yan. Only had nurses at Saigon and the train at the hospitals then. And anyway, they took good care of me. It didn't get any type of infection or anything. I went back a week later, and I was declared ready for duty again.
So were those Purple Heart instances?
Yes, I got a Purple Heart by the Air Force for that.
Wow.
Yes, that made my second Purple Heart in about 3 weeks.
So, well, did you think you were blessed? Did you think somebody was watching out for you, or you just thought, well, I'm not ready to clock out yet?
Well, you know, I always felt that God was watching out for me. Always did. Never had any doubt.
Hmm.
And that's why I wasn't worried.
Wow. That's amazing.
Well, now this incident is on page 192 in the Mother Please Let Me Go book. And I had been out on a maneuver with the Special Forces. Actually, we had been to a hamlet and we were helping them repair their defenses after an attack by the Viet Cong had killed several of the villagers. And I had returned to Queen Yan on the afternoon of 12 December, and Major Matthews, our executive officer, I asked him would he take me to my building compound where we all lived, so that I could take a shower and get on clean clothes, maybe eat a decent meal for a change, and then I was going back out to our headquarters building that night and work on some personnel actions that had been put in my in-basket, and also work on the per diem vouchers that had to go to Saigon on the 15th of November, or 15th of December. But anyway, when I got out there, I got all the personnel actions done, and it was just about dark when I got there, and it was well after dark before I knew I would finish and hike back to the building compound. But anyway, had almost all the travel vouchers finished. I had been typing them. They were almost all finished. And I got a creepy feeling I was being watched.
So you felt that?
Yes, I felt that. And also the hair on the side of my head and the back of my neck was standing up. And when I would brush it down, it wouldn't stay down. Well, I got up and looked around, and now our headquarters building, it was a building that's approximately 20 feet wide and 40 feet long, and it was made of native brick halfway up, and we had screened the rest of the way, and we had a corrugated roof on it, and we had screen doors at the north end of the building and at the south end of the building. Well, I got up and looked around, and I went up to the north end of the building, and I saw that the light was out, and I made a mental note to replace the bulb the next day. And then I went down and checked the south end of the building. As I looked out, 2 Viet Cong stood up. And 2 young Viet Cong. Matter of fact, they probably couldn't have been probably more than 12 or 13. They pointed their AK-47s at me.
Wow.
And I knew the one troop was going to pull the trigger. So I grabbed my heavy underduty typewriter, and I threw it through the screen door into their faces and knocked them down. And I pushed the end of the rifle up. And when he fired the AK-47, I did feel something lightly touch me at the hairline, and actually the bullet went through the top of the door frame. And when I threw the typewriter, it knocked the Viet Cong troops down. I pushed the screen door open and broke it all to heck against their legs, but I disarmed them, broke their weapons on a generator, and I know the kids thought I was going to shoot them because they were trying to beg me in Vietnamese not to shoot them. I had no intentions of shooting these kids, but anyway, I didn't want the kids shooting at me. So I busted the weapons on a generator and kicked the stick out from the arm of the generator, and everything went dark, and I took down the road, and all 30, 40 seconds later, I heard some Viet Cong chasing me, but they had no chance of catching me.
So it was a bigger group than just 2.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, the Vietnamese had a ranger company at the north end of the base, and they had come to attack the ranger company that night.
Wow.
And kill their 2 generals that had flown in on a helicopter.
So they had info and intel, and
right.
They were trying to neutralize the camp.
Yes, they were.
And you neutralized them with an Underwood typewriter.
Neutralized me in the meantime, and they're very light casualties, actually, for the amount of, or the number of Viet Cong attacking, but the Vietnamese in the control tower was killed. The Vietnamese at the gate guard at the southern end, southeast end of the base was killed. And I think maybe a couple of the Rangers were killed, but very, very light casualties. to be attacked by a force of Viet Cong that big.
These exciting stories and more you're going to find in Mother, Please Let Me Go by H.D. Graham. And we're going back over some of these because it's so packed full of fascinating facts and interesting insights into Cambodia, Vietnam, him as an advisor, that you'll want to get this book.
Then on 19 December, I was with the Special Forces again, and we had gone to a hamlet about 30, well, probably 25, 30 miles northwest of Quy Nhon, and we were going to, we had some Popular Forces with us and some Special Forces and myself, and we were going to guard the Vietnamese villagers while they harvested their crops, because every time they started to harvest their crops, the Viet Cong would snipe at them, and they killed 2 or 3 of them. So the village chief asked for some help, so they sent out some Popular Forces, probably about 30 of them, and I think there was like 10 Special Forces involved, and I went with them. Their colonel had asked our Colonel Dix if he'd let me go, and so I was accompanying them. And right before we got to the hamlet, we were taking sniper fire, not real heavy fire, but probably 8 or 10 rounds were fired at us, and we went on into the hamlet, and our Special Forces leader, which was a lieutenant, he decided to take the troops back out and most of the Civil Guard with him, and they were going to try to chase down these Viet Cong or flash them out so they wouldn't be firing at us or the villagers as they harvested their crops. But anyway, I was asked to stay with a couple of Special Forces, or with a couple of the Popular Forces troopers at the village to protect the villagers while they were gone. Well, probably 30 minutes after they left, 4 of the Popular Forces returned, and they lined the villagers up, and I didn't really know what was going on at first, and then they brought their weapons up to fire at the villagers.
Oh, my.
And I jumped between the villagers and the 4 Popular Forces troopers, and they really weren't paying any attention to me, and I got them, I pointed my weapon at them and was speaking in their language and telling them I was going to wipe them out if they didn't put their weapons down, because those civilians were left in my care, and I wasn't going to see them killed like a bunch of dogs.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so the villagers helped disarm them, and when the lieutenant and the Popular Forces and the Special Forces, Vietnamese Special Forces lieutenant returned, I told him what happened, why I had the troops under weapons, and I was guarding them, and the Special Forces Vietnamese commander, which was, I think he was a lieutenant at the time, he arrested the 4 Popular Forces guys, and an investigation revealed they were actually Viet Cong dressed up in Popular Forces uniforms, and they were going to kill the villagers and blame it on the Army troops, our Special Forces, and also the Vietnamese troops, hoping to start a war within a war between VNAF, since there were VNAF dependents, and the Vietnamese Army troops.
Wow. Disinformation campaign and vicious...
and that went on all the time.
Wow.
They really went on all the time.
Wow.
So that was exciting.
To say the least.
And then we're going to skip to page 200 in the Mother, Please Let Me Go book. And this is Christmas lights for the VC. The Vietnamese employees, which we had probably about 20 of them, they asked Colonel Dix if they could put up some outside Christmas lights. And after thinking about it a few seconds, he agreed that would be a nice gesture for Christmas and so forth. And Major Matthews and myself, we talked with him after he made the decision and tried to get him to reverse his decision, because unfortunately our domestic employees could not be trusted, or most of them could not be trusted, and we actually felt a lot of them were either spies for the Viet Cong or actually Viet Cong themselves. Well, anyway, the colonel just brushed us off and told us we should be more trusting of our Vietnamese hosts and so forth. So the next night, I believe it was the next night, perhaps 2 nights later, our Special Forces recon teams were out in the area, and they happened to notice the lights from the mountains. And then when they came in, they told their commander and a couple of their senior NCOs and their commander come over to talk with Colonel Dix. and he did not pay any more attention to those special forces than he had us. And the special forces, they could be brutal and forceful in their decisions and their wishes, but they were sort of leery of Colonel Dix because he was the ranking United States military officer there,
Right.
and he was just a detachment commander, but the Air Force didn't go half measure. He was a full colonel, and the highest rank the Special Forces individuals had there, they had probably nearly 100 troops, and with the aviation detachment, they probably had another 75, 80 troops, but their highest ranking officer in the Army there was a major, and a major is not going to buck a full colonel, no matter
Right.
what branch he's in.
Right.
So anyway, Colonel Dix's decision prevailed, and on Christmas Eve, the Viet Cong attacked our building facility, our Air Force building facility off base, with small arms fire. And we had a gun room and an ammo room on the second floor in our building compound, but unfortunately, we, the occupants of the building at the time, did not have keys to those two rooms. Only our first sergeant, Sergeant Sykes, and Colonel Dix had the keys to the weapons room and to the ammunition room, and they were two separate rooms and two separate locks. And so we couldn't fight back. Well, anyway, we looked for axes or anything to break the locks, or any instrument we could break the locks with. We didn't have anything. Well, so probably after, I think the attack was actually about 20 minutes till midnight on
Wow.
Christmas Eve. But anyway, sometime after midnight, after the VC had withdrawn, Colonel Dix returned to the compound, and he was absolutely shocked to hear that the Viet Cong had attacked his compound. And he was over with the aviation officers celebrating Christmas, and Sergeant Sykes was spending the night off base, and I don't even want to think about what he was probably doing. But anyway, they weren't on base, and they had the keys, and we couldn't fight back. And we really only had one injury, and that was one of our pilots. He fell down a flight of steps and sprained his ankle and hurt his leg somewhat.
Well, why do you think they withdrew if they had you at that disadvantage? Why would they withdraw?
Because they were just testing us.
Oh, I see.
They were just testing us.
I see.
Next couple of days, the Special Forces intel people had come up with some recon information that was of particular interest to us, and they came over and briefed Colonel Dix that the Viet Cong were going to attack us full force on New Year's Eve with the intentions of overrunning the compound, killing everybody inside, and taking over. And Colonel Dix didn't want to buy that information at first, but it was so convincing he really didn't have any choice, because if they actually did attack and he had made no preparation for the attack, he was going to be in big trouble.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. So anyway, he decided to give the domestic employees and their families that lived on the first floor of our building compound the rest of the holiday season off, and told them not to come back until 2 January 64. And after they left, the Special Forces moved in, and they helped us build scaffolding around the inside of our 6-foot walls. And then we placed machine guns and small arms weapons on the walls, and also spotlights. And when they attacked us almost about 10:30 on New Year's Eve, they sent 6 sappers. Sappers are Viet Cong with SASL charges or explosives on their bodies over the west wall to blow open the gates. And as they came over the west wall, 2 Special Forces troopers and myself mowed them down with the M2s and shotguns. So that blunted that attack anyway. An attack actually with small arms fire went on for probably about an hour. And of course, we opened up with machine guns, so we turned our spotlights on. And besides the 6 Viet Cong killed inside our compound, probably 6 or 8 were killed outside the compound, but there was not an actual body count for the ones outside the compound, because they always drag their wounded and deceased troops away. So you can't get an accurate count. But anyway, as they withdrew that evening or that night, sometime after midnight, and the next morning they were going to withdraw back further into the jungles, and they were caught out in the open by some Vietnamese armored personnel I think they probably had 8 or 10 armored vehicles and probably 30, 40 troops. and they actually almost totally wiped those Viet Cong out.
So they were decimated when they thought they were going to be the victors and
Right.
take over your base.
And the ironic situation was, a couple of days later, the Viet Cong put out a flyer that indicated they had killed 6 Americans and wounded almost everybody in the compound. And that was not true at all. We had absolutely no injuries at all among the Special Forces or the Air Force troops, and we did have 6 Vietnamese casualties inside. And the thing that really upset me most, and Major Matthews, was those casualties, those 6 casualties, 3 of them were actually employees in our compound.
Mm.
One was the barber that nobody cared much for, and one was our young cook that worked with our lady cook, and one was a houseboy from the leper colony that shined his shoes and took care of our uniforms and so on and so forth for a very nominal fee.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. We're listening to HD talk about his experiences in Vietnam, and it's very, very important for you to think about getting his book so you can read it in your own detail at your own speed. Mother, Please Let Me Go is signing up for the Air Force.
Now, my last recon mission with the Special Forces was from 7 to 9 January 1964. And we went out in force this time. We were going to observe the Ayan River, which is in the central part of Vietnam. It runs from north of Quy Nhon, and it comes out to the South China Sea at just south of the train, which is quite a long journey. But anyway, this river was being used by the Viet Cong to ferry troops across every night, and a lot of ammunition, food, other supplies, and I guess Headquarters MAG wanted to put a stop to this flow of troops and weapons. So anyway, they sent out the recon teams, and it was 4 recon teams. We were 4 3-man teams, and we had 2 Vietnamese on one team and 1 American on 2 of the teams. And the other 2 teams was 2 Americans, 1 Vietnamese. And I was with the southernmost team, and we were about a mile south of, my team was called Alpha Team, and Bravo Team was about a mile north of us along the east side of the river. And Charlie Team was about a mile north of Bravo Team, and Delta Team was about a mile north of Charlie Team. So we were scattered within a 4-mile area on the east side of the river to observe the flow of ammunition, troops and other supplies, and the routes they were taking into the heartland of South Vietnam. Well, on the morning, early morning, right before daylight on 9 January, Charlie Team was attacked by some snipers, and the 2 Martin-Yard troops on that team were killed, and the American advisor, Special Forces advisor, was thought to have been killed at the time. And time we got to their camp, the battle was over. There really wasn't any return fire from our troops at all because they'd been sleeping at the time. And I think Bravo Team got there, was the first team to arrive at Charlie's location, then Delta, and we were the last team because we were a couple miles away than the other teams were. But anyway, when we arrived there, you could see that the casualties were clearly dead. They'd all been shot in the head or the forehead or so forth.
Oh, my.
And so the team leader, or the overall recon leader, decided they were going to take all the forces out and try to chase down these assassins and wipe them out if possible. And he asked me to stay there and guard casualties, because if that isn't done, the Viet Cong women and children will move in and they will mutilate the bodies and strip the bodies and so forth and steal all their possessions. So they left me there to guard the casualties, make sure this didn't happen, because a chopper was on its way in to take the casualties out. Well, when the chopper landed, one of the crew members jumped out, and it probably landed 70, 80 feet from me. But anyway, he was running toward me, and he got within probably handshaking distance of me, and his eyes got real large, and he turned around and raced back to the chopper, and the chopper took off without taking casualties. Well, I thought, based upon his reaction, that the Viet Cong were pouring out of the jungle behind me. So I decided, well, they're going to get me, but I'm going to take as many with me as possible. So I started to whip around, and as I started to whip around, that dead Special Forces trooper set up and grabbed the back of my pants leg and about scared me to death. I mean, I don't mind people grabbing the back of my pants leg every now and then, but for a dead person to do it, that was just a little bit too much. So anyway, I kicked him loose with my right foot, and as he was falling backward, I happened to notice that his eyes moved. But apparently I didn't think of that for several minutes because I kept trying to move away from the casualties, and especially from this person that grabbed me. And I couldn't go forward, I couldn't go backward, and I couldn't go sideways. And of course, even though I did try to take a step forward, I really didn't want to approach that dead person. But anyway, it seems like I was paralyzed. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute. When he fell backward, I saw his eyes move. So then I knew he couldn't have possibly been dead. So I dropped down on the ground and started to administer medical care to him. And I was cleaning him up and everything. And he had been shot in the forehead, and the bullet had traveled around the side of his head under the skin above his ear and came out in the back. And the Special Forces, when they examined him, he didn't appear to be breathing, and they saw the hole in the forehead and the exit hole in the back, and they thought he was deceased.
They just assumed he was dead.
Right. And, well, he was almost deceased because I kicked him pretty hard and knocked him down. But anyway, then he started choking, and I opened his mouth, and it was probably at least halfway, 3/4 of the way, full of blood.
Oh, my gosh.
And so I just used my index finger and my middle finger and started scooping the blood out of his mouth as if I was using a spoon. And I kept him from choking to death. And he actually recovered. Sometime later, he went to the hospital in a train. And then they took him to the Philippines, and then they took him to some military base near his home in Texas. And he actually survived.
Oh, my gosh. Unbelievable.
Yep, it was.
Was it painful for you to talk about these memories?
That, anyway, because I dream about it all the time.
It's still in your memory?
All the time. And the other things, too.
Does it help to talk about that?
Yes, it does. A lot of people says it doesn't, but it really does.
Yeah, I would think so. You can kind of vent that.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you sharing with us.
Well, the Army gave me a Bronze Star Medal with V device.
That's fantastic. We're going to be showing you. You want to stay with us on all these. You got another one for us?
Well, I do. This was my last trip to Saigon to pick up per diem vouchers on 15 January 1964, right before I left the country. The last time I worked with the Special Forces, as a member of the Special Forces anyway. Major Matthews, who was our executive officer at Quin Yon, he decided to go with me to pick up the per diem vouchers and take them to Saigon to get the money, deposit a lot of it in their accounts, and bring $100 back to each troop. And when we got to Saigon, we went to base finance, and he wanted to get to know the people because he was going to be taking over my many various jobs after I left because they weren't going to have anyone else. So he was going to assume the responsibility, so he wanted to meet all these people we'd be dealing with. And then after we went to finance and then to the bank, we went to the commissary and got our food was necessary for the next couple of weeks. And as we came out of the commissary, I noticed a couple of kids tying something in a low bush or perhaps a low tree, and it looked like some type of explosive device. Well, I had been trained by the demolition men what reactions you had to take if you saw anything suspicious like that. So I yelled, "Hit the deck," and everybody within hearing distance hit the ground. And that explosive device actually exploded a few seconds later, killing the two kids.
Oh.
And we briefed the security personnel, the military, Vietnamese military security personnel, and also the Air Force security personnel since it was Tan Son Nhut Air Base about what happened. And then we took out to the BX to pick up the rest of the supplies. And the Special Forces and the Air Force people, Quin Yon, always left wish lists in my in basket for things they wanted from the BX when I went to Saigon. So that's what we were going to fulfill then. So anyway, as we came out of the BX after we got everything we wanted, we had probably only about 30 feet away from the BX door, and this girl riding on the back of a bike tossed a grenade at the BX door.
Oh my gosh.
Well, it exploded a few seconds after she tossed it, and one of our security policemen, or Air Force security personnel, he dived at the bike and caused it to wreck, and he arrested the bicycle operator and the girl on the back, and nobody was killed or injured, but nobody was killed, but there was quite a few injuries from shrapnel from the grenade and also flying debris from the door that was just disintegrated.
Yeah.
And when we got back to Quin Yon that evening, Major Matthews was telling Colonel Dix about all the things that happened in Saigon, and Colonel Dix says, I don't know what we're going to do with HD. Every time I send him in any place, he either gets wounded or gets involved in things that he shouldn't be involved in. And Major Matthews says, Colonel, if it hadn't been for HD and him shouting, probably a lot of people would have been killed or injured.
Yeah, exactly.
And Colonel Dix didn't say anymore, but still he wasn't a happy camper.
Well, here's what amazes me, though, HD, is you just went on like this normal business. Kids tying, high explosives on a bush just a few yards away, and you hit the deck, you can just get up and go on about your business.
Well,
is that war?
I had been through so much that it really got to the point it didn't face me, and I didn't think I was going to survive anyway, so it didn't make any difference.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Okay, now this is sort of a funny incident, and it's not in my book, but it was another recon mission that took place in August '63, and I was with a team of 2 Special Forces and 2 Montagnards and myself. We made a recon team of 5 individuals, and I was the point man on this recon team. And I had asked several times, wait a minute, why am I the point man? I'm not the most knowledgeable on recon and all this stuff. I'm more or less an interloper, but yet I'm the point man. Well, the Lieutenant Benson informed me, well, you're expendable.
You're expendable,
You're
buddy.
expendable, but my troops aren't, so that's why you're point man.
Poor guy, HD.
But anyway, I was point man on this recon patrol, and we were approaching a very sharp right turn in the jungle trail. And as I went around the right turn, right in the middle of the trail was 6 or 7 Viet Cong, and they had rice bowls up to their chin and chopsticks, and they were shoveling rice into their mouths with the chopsticks from the bowl. And I just cut loose at them with my M2, and they scattered like a bunch of quails, and you could see chopsticks and bowls going every which way.
Rice flying in the
And
air.
the Viet Cong just scattered into the jungle, and we never heard them or saw them again. And when we got up to their area, which was probably 30, 40 feet away, we did find a few blood drops, so I guess I must have hit a couple of them. Apparently not serious enough because they took off. But we confiscated their rice bowls, we confiscated their chopsticks, their backpacks, and all their AK-47s. They just abandoned everything and left.
They just ran.
And
amazing.
The Special Forces troops thought that was hilarious, and they dogged me for a long time. You had a clear shot at 6 or 7 people, and the only thing we get out of it is 4 or 5 drops of blood and bowls of rice and chopsticks.
Amazing.
So they made light of just about everything, just about like I did.
Well, they had to kind of laugh at it.
If you wanted to survive, you had to.
You had to laugh at it.
Yes.
Right. Had to laugh at it.
And the only other thing I wanted to talk about that was listed in my Mother Please Let Me Go book is the South Vietnamese government awarded me 6 Vietnamese medals on 12 December 1971.
6 different medals.
Right. And the first one was the Republic of Vietnam Honor Medal First Class for saving the lives of approximately 20 civilians at that Air Force hamlet.
Right, right.
The Vietnamese Air Force hamlet, where their dependents were. And the second one was a wound medal for my wounds on 17 October. And the third one was also a wound medal with a battle star for my wound on 7 November. And then I was giving the Vietnamese life-saving medal for saving the lives of the generals, the two Vietnamese generals, and the Rangers, the Vietnamese Rangers, on 12 December 1963, it would have been. And I didn't think I deserved any of those medals, but apparently the South Vietnamese government thought I did. I did not do anything more than any special forces or special ops troop would have done.
I don't know, HD. It seems to me like you did an awful lot. Like I said, you just went on about business.
Well, then they gave me the Civil Actions Medal, first class, and that was for my support and help at the leper colony, which was we sponsored southwest of Quin Yon, and also as being the primary medic for the Banier, Coho, and Arati Montagnard tribes in the Central Highlands. I mean, I wasn't much of a medic, but I mean, when they didn't have anything at all, I guess I was better than nothing.
you seem to minimize your contributions, HD, but we think they're grand. So,
well, I was not formally trained to be a medic. The Vietnamese just thought I would make a good medic.
Make a good medic.
And so that was another additional duty I had, was the medic, and I accompanied the Special Forces medics when they went to the hamlets to minister to the inhabitants, and when they went to the leper colony, we always took a Special Forces medic with us because we really didn't have one, and I didn't feel comfortable operating by myself. But of course, now I did dress a lot of wounds and things by myself when I was in Vietnam with the Special Forces, and when things happened in the jungle, because there's nobody else to do it.
Nobody else to do it.
And it got to the point, and it should never get to that point, but it got to the point that I just did the best I could, and I just looked up on it as helping the people and the American forces especially as much as I could, because I knew myself I wasn't trained to do that, but they needed help. So I gave them all the help I possibly could.
Somebody had to do it.
Someone had to do it.
Somebody
and
had
it
to
got to
step
the
up.
point I was not uncomfortable doing it.
Just step up and do it.
And that just about takes care of everything that we had not covered in the Mother
Okay.
Please Let Me
Very
Go
good.
book.
You've been watching the H.D. Graham story, and especially about his Mother Please Let Me Go book. And we really appreciate you watching, and we're going to continue with all the other books, but we wanted to make sure that we got this covered. You'll want to get this. H.D., tell us how we can get this book. Somebody watching wants to reach out and grab this book.
Well, you can get all the books from Ex Libris Publishing Company, which they're online, and you can also get them from Amazon, and you can get them directly from me, and I will personalize every book you get from me. Now, if you get the books directly from me, you should contact me at 36008 State Route 143, Pomeroy, Pomeroi, Ohio 45769. Phone number 740-742-3033, and I will sell you a hardback for $20 plus $6 handling and shipping, or a softback of any of the books for $15 plus $6 shipping and handling. Now, if you get the book from Amazon or from Ex Libris, they are also going to charge you postage and handling. Besides the price of the book from both agencies is $29.99 for the hardback, $19.99 for the softback, plus they're going to charge you $19.99 or $95, I guess it is, shipping and handling. Now, it's amazing to me that I can ship books, put them in boxes, and ship them and everything for right at $6 a book, but yet they have to have $19.99 or $19.95.
Well, I guess there's
Just amazing.
a bunch of people involved. Get your copy of H.D. Graham's book. You can write him right here. He'll sign every one of them for you, and you can buy family, or if you've got a veteran in your family, you'll want to get this book. You've been watching All Points Special Edition, and we've been talking to H.D. Graham, especially about his book called Mother, Please Let Me Go. And we've only touched on the detail that's involved in here. We know that it's interesting, and particularly it's very special for you to get it. So we appreciate you watching. Please continue to watch our series as we continue to talk to H.D. Graham about his story and his life as special operations and his very, very colorful life all throughout. I'm Dave Lucas, your host, and we'll be contacting you again. We'll be bringing this to you again. Please keep watching, like and subscribe, and make sure that you tune back in for our next segment, H.D. Graham.